Hello! To make this top, which is also a corset, you'll need a 5.5mm hook and medium yarn, but if you don't have medium yarn like me, you can use 2 strands of the small yarn. So first you'll make your slip stitch and then chain 200 stitches. The measurements I use are for a small, so if you're a small you can use the same exact measurements, but if not, you can adjust accordingly. So we're gonna be using single crochet for this. So you'll go through all the 200 stitches with your single crochet until you get to the very end. The 200 stitches represent your straps, so if you'd like shorter or longer straps, you can adjust that as well. So yeah, just to let you know as you are on this step. Once you get to the last stitch, chain 1 and go to the next round. And that is where we'll start the ribbing process. And that's also where the top begins. So far we've only been making the straps, but now we're gonna make the top. So from the second stitch, you're gonna only stitch the outward part of a stitch to create the ribbing effect, and you will do that throughout the top. So if you'd like a tutorial on how to do the ribbing stitch, just tell me. I'll make it for you. If you don't like the ribbing effect, you don't have to do this, but I wanted to make it ribbed, and this is exactly how you do it. And if you're a beginner and you're starting with the ribbing stitch, make sure you use the medium yarn, because using 2 strands of yarn could ruin it for you or cause a lot of confusion. So just get the medium yarn. And when I'm ribbing, I don't rib the very last stitch. So the stitches on the edge, I make sure to do a full stitch instead of only the top stitch. That's just for it to be neat, but you don't have to do that. And once you're done with the 25 stitches, chain 1 and go to the next row. I usually count my stitches just to make sure, and once I go to the next row, I'll continue with the ribbing pattern. So on this row, which is the 4th row, is where we'll start increasing, but we'll only increase on the very last stitch. So we'll do the same thing we've done on the 3rd row for the 24 stitches, and once we get to the 25th stitch, which is the last stitch, is when I will show you how to increase. The best thing about this top, it's a very repetitive process, so it's really good for beginners since you just repeat the same thing over and over again, and you don't need a lot of time to make it since it's such a small piece. We're almost done with the 4th row, so on the 25th stitch, I'll do 1 ribbing stitch and 1 normal stitch. So that is 2 single crochet stitches on the last stitch, which is the 25th stitch. And that is when you will do the 1 stitch and turn to the next round, which is now the 5th round. So on the 5th round, we won't increase anything. We'll continue with the ribbing till the end. And the next time we're gonna increase on the 6th round. So now that we're on the 6th round, we'll do the same thing until we get to the very last stitch, which is the 26th stitch. Then from there, we'll increase 1 stitch. So we'll end up with 27 stitches on this round. And that is still single crochet, same thing you did on the 4th stitch, except now it's a 6th stitch and you'll end up with more stitches. So I'm showing you a close-up of exactly what I do when I'm increasing, and you'll follow this through to the middle of the top. So basically you will increase on every other row. So now that you're on the 6th row increasing, the next time you'll increase is when you're on the 8th row. The next time you'll increase is the 10th row, then the 12th, and so on and so forth. And you're only increasing the end without a strap. So at this point, it should look like this. And you'll continue with this until you get to halfway of your measurements. For mine, I did up to 26 rows. And when you're counting the rows, don't mistake them for the ribbing. So the one rib is equals to 2 rows. So yeah, make sure you keep that in mind. So if you like it to be double colored, this is where you introduce the second color. But if you like it to be one color, you just keep the same color. But for me, I wanted to introduce the dark purple, so this is how I did it. First, I created a slip stitch, and once you have a slip stitch, you go ahead and put it into the last stitch that you had. So the last stitch is basically the very last stitch on the last row that you're on. So you'll use that to make one chain so that you can go to the next row. Then you'll make a knot with a light purple. You can do that later, but if you want to get rid of it, you can do it right now. Make a knot and cut it so that you won't have the light purple or the lilac still hanging around. Once you have gotten rid of the lilac or your first color, go ahead and proceed with single crochets. You can tuck in the ends so that you won't have to weave them in later, and you can also just leave them and weave them in later, but you're gonna go ahead and proceed with the single crochets. And remember, we're still ribbing, so the top part of your stitch or the outer part of your stitch is what we're using. It's basically the same thing we've been doing for the first half of the top, except for the second half we'll now decrease, and we'll decrease with the same frequency that we did with the increases. So once you get towards the end and you have 2 stitches remaining, you'll skip the second last stitch and put your hook into the very last stitch. So that means you have decreased 1 stitch. And then you'll turn it around and single crochet every single stitch, and then you will decrease on the next round. So basically you'll just do the same thing except you're now decreasing. If you chose not to go with the ribbing, you'll still continue with the same process that you used. If you chose to do the ribbing, you will do the same thing that I'm doing. And since we're only decreasing on one end of the top, we're still making sure that the top part, the part where the sleeves come out of, have the same number of stitches. So we're only decreasing on that one end. So you can see how it looks like, and you'll basically do the same process. Continue decreasing on every other row. Just decrease 1 stitch per row. And once you get to the full length, then I'll show you what to do from there. So this is a close-up of how I'm decreasing. Just one more time to make sure that we're on the same page. Then we'll go to the next step. So you'll do the same thing over and over until you get to the very end. You'll know that you have gotten to the end once you have 1 row less than the other half of the top. So you should have something that looks like this. You'll see the decreases, and then you'll need to count how many rows you have to know when you'll need to start the last row, which is where you will have your strap. So remember, the strap has to come out of the straight side, so you'll make sure that you are counting when you are heading towards the straight side. So now you will do that last row the same way you've been doing everything else. You'll still decrease, and then once you get to the top, you now do a chain of 175 stitches. If you remember in the beginning, when we were doing the other strap, we did 200 stitches, and with the 200 stitches, we did 25 stitches on the top. So the 175 plus 25, which is what you should have by the time you are on your last row, sums up to 200 stitches, which is what we began with in the first lace. Remember, I'm using the measurements of a small, so in case you like to make a bigger size or a smaller size, you can do that. I'll adjust accordingly, but I'm using the measurements of a small, so in case you'd like to have longer straps or shorter straps, you can also adjust accordingly. So once you get to your desired strap length, you'll crochet single crochets into every single stitch. So do that till you get to the part where you started your strap, and you won't stop at the strap. You will continue to the bottom of the top. So you'll still do the very last decrease. So yeah, that's to make sure that the strap is firmly secured to the top. And when you finish the strap, once you go back to single crochets on the top, remember the ribbing as well. So you'll still do the ribbing and the very last decrease. So that is literally the last stitch of this top. So now you'll just need to weave in your ends, and I'm going to show you how to put the straps in where they need to go for the top to be functional. So you're going to take one end of a strap. So I'll start with the light purple strap. Then on the very last stitch that I had on the dark side, I will put in my hook and take the end of the strap and pull it through there. And I'll do the same on the other side with the other strap. And that's how you make the top that's a corset. So this is how it looks as a top. That's the back. And this is how it looks as a corset.